Brian Flores was an exciting hire last year for the Pittsburgh Steelers coaching staff, but will he be with them for another year? Or how much longer will he be there? That's been a big question after a lot of people saw interviews coming his way. We'll talk about that here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. We're joined by the Athletic's Mike DeFabo, who's been covering the Steelers religiously, but he's also in Mobile for Senior Bowl week. We want to get some preview notes before the practices start flying here on the Tuesday episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find this show on any podcast platform out there, but especially on YouTube. Like this video if you saw it on YouTube. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making the Locked On Steelers podcast your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. Today's episode is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more by visiting FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. As I said before, we're rejoined by our friend Mike DeFabo, who is down there in Mobile. He's got his hat. He's in his hotel room. He's looking official right now. Mike, how you doing, man?
Hey, I'm doing great, Chris. Thank you so much for having me. Always a pleasure to talk with you, especially when we're talking football.
Absolutely. Mike, I got to leave this off with a conversation about Brian Flores, because, and we'll get to the Senior Bowl talk in just a bit here, but I think it's interesting that Brian Flores, Mike Tomlin did acknowledge, like, there have been interview requests for Brian Flores and things like that. And there was a sense that, he's just going to be gone. Like, he's not going to be a senior defensive assistant for more than a year. He's going to be gone. But here we are, and he's still on the roster. And guys like Lou Anarumo, the Bengals defensive coordinator, he's getting interviews, and there's other guys being looked at right now. Do you get a sense, as just a person who you cover the team for the Athletic, you do a great job, you've given, even just in 1 year, you've gained a lot of insights. Do you see Brian Flores sticking around for at least another year with this team, or do you think he is going to get scooped up?
Here's what I think it comes down to. I think it comes down to what is the opportunity for Brian Flores and what's he looking for? Because as we know, he's interviewed for the Arizona Cardinals head coaching position. There's also been a couple teams that have been after him to be a defensive coordinator. So he's a guy who has worn multiple hats in the NFL in the past. He's been a head coach. He's been in the front office. He's been on the defensive side of the ball in various capacities. So what's he looking for at this stage in his career? Is he going to be a guy that if one of these teams decides to offer him their defensive coordinator job, is that good enough for him? Is that enticing enough? Or is he going to hold out for the head coaching job? And I think that's what ultimately it comes down to, is what's he looking for and what's going to be available to him.
I feel you on that, because this is a guy who was a head coach, and then of course you had his lawsuit break out where he was alleging like he was being skipped over, the way he was treated in some of his interviews, and that's something that's still being dealt with right now in the legal process. But obviously that's a major concern for Brian Flores right now. And there was the question, would he ever coach again in the NFL when he filed that lawsuit? Because there was a lot of talk about that. And then of course there was he was talking to Mike Tomlin with him, we're talking about it, and he got a job with the Steelers, and he's been with them for the past year. He was a senior defensive assistant and oversaw some things, but I do think there's a point to what you're saying, Mike. What's the point of going to another organization where he kind of has free reign at the Steelers, unless it's the head coaching job that he wants? Maybe he doesn't leap at the situation, and maybe he wants to be a defensive coordinator somewhere where he calls all the plays and it's his show. But I do think he has the benefit of, he knows he's working in an organization that finds a way to have success more oftentimes than not, and has a defense that he's going to be part of coaching, where he's going to have TJ Watt, he's going to have Minkah Fitzpatrick, he's going to have Cam Hayward, he's going to have all these role pieces, and he knows also Kenny Pickett acknowledging, like, he also got to touch on the offense a little bit. I wonder if those type of things also weigh into the decision and what he values as far as what he's doing for a job right now.
Right. And then the other thing on top of it is, and you kind of touched on this, the Steelers are an organization that they've always advocated for minority hires, and have, obviously there's the Rooney Rule, which was named after them. Everybody obviously knows the idea behind that.
Yeah.
So to be in part of an organization that I'm sure he feels like supports him, respects him, sees his value, and appreciates him, he's going to have something that's clearly a better offer. And I think if you're the Steelers, you have to feel two ways about this whole thing. On
Right.
one hand, like, you brought him in for this purpose, to help him, to set him up for success and put him in a position that he could get back and have his foot back in the door as a head coach.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'd feel, I would think, proud that you were able to put him in that opportunity or help him get to that point. At the same time, you're also not going to be heartbroken if he doesn't get these jobs and you have him back and he can continue to contribute in all the ways that he has. And a lot of guys have talked about the range of things that he's done, whether that's working individually with inside linebackers. And when Devin Bush was playing a lot better at the beginning of the year, people were giving him a lot of credit for that. You look at the way more broadly on defense, guys have talked about how just the stopping the run and some of the schematics that he came up with in the run game and the run defense has been significant. And then just having another guy that's very well respected and could be a head coach within your organization, I think adds some value to it. So I'm sure the Steelers would be thrilled for him if he got the chance, but if he doesn't, then he'll still continue to be a valuable piece of that organization.
I hear you definitely on that. What was your thoughts on just what he was able to bring to the table for the Steelers as an extra pair of eyes? Because everyone just thought he was just going to be a linebackers coach, but it seemed like he kind of had he got a chance to kind of get his fingerprints in a lot of different places in the organization.
Yeah, it's tough because when you do ask the coaches questions, often they'll say, well, it's a team decision. It's a Steelers decision. So they won't go into too much nuance or detail about exactly how they split things up in terms of roles and responsibilities. But talking with the players, they were a little more transparent. And as I mentioned, they said specifically they felt like when it came to stopping the run and some of the improvements the Steelers showed in that regard as the season went on, they felt like he was really impactful there. So, I know that he's very well respected, and, it is going to be really curious to continue to follow this and see what kind of opportunities he has in front of him.
It certainly will. For the record, the Steelers finished the year ranked 9th in rushing defense as far as yards allowed, 8th in yards per attempt allowed. And that was a major emphasis because in 2021, they finished dead last in stopping the run, and both yards and yards per attempt, something that Art Rooney said had to change, and it definitely did. So if the Steelers are pointing to Brian Flores for what he brought there, I think that says a lot about his importance to the team. It's not a given that he's going to stay, but he is still with the team. Art Rooney said in the owners meeting that he had last week that, Mike Tomlin, they were still going over all the coaches and things, and he said that there's a chance that there could be guys who move on. Maybe Brian Flores will be a part of them, but I think that right now he has been an asset to the team, and I think it'd be interesting to see, what kind of opportunity he would get if he left this year, or if he says, "Hey, you know what? Sticking around." There's a lot of there's confidence about this young group of Steelers that they have right now on the offensive side of the ball, and the chances that they'll have to compete on the defensive side of the ball, and that. Maybe if he's here for another year and next year is the year that the Steelers kind of get back up to get a chance to get double-digit wins, maybe get a playoff win, and people start looking and say, oh, are the Steelers back? That could be something, I think, where Brian Flores is then able to say, you know what? Hey, I was part of this rise and making this happen. This is what I can bring to the table as a head coach of your organization.
Right. Yeah. I think a lot of it's about striking while the iron's hot. And when your name is out there, and it becomes almost like a self-perpetuating thing where you start hearing guys are being interviewed for jobs and all of a sudden they get more and more and more. And I think that kind of unfolds. If he doesn't become a head coach, I would be curious too. All defensive coordinators are not created equally in terms of, like, you look at what happened in Miami with Mike McDaniel hiring Vic Fangio. And essentially in that situation, when you've got a young offensive minded coach, in Mike McDaniel, and then you've got a more veteran defensive coordinator, you could see where it's going to be a situation where Vic Fangio is going to be the head coach of the defense. And so if Flores does not move on and have an opportunity to be a head coach, I would imagine something like that would be more enticing, where you've got maybe a less experienced head coach that's offensive minded, and the whole defense is yours. And even though you might not have the role of head coach, it's a meatier responsibility than just coordinating the defense. So that's something I would keep an eye on as well.
Absolutely, that'll be something that we'll keep monitoring on. We'll talk about that when we get more concrete information on what Brian Flores decides. But I want to get Mike's thoughts on the Senior Bowl because he's there to cover it. We'll get insight on some players that he's looking at and just a preview as far as the players who are there, the position groups, and what comes with the Senior Bowl week. That's going to be all this week. And of course, the Senior Bowl being played this weekend. We'll do that right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. So stick with us. But first, we got to talk to you about our great sponsors at Blue Nile. With Valentine's Day coming up, it means romance is in the air even more than usual. I don't need to tell all the lovebirds out there that you've probably had your date plans on the calendar for weeks. But have you found the perfect Valentine's Day gift yet? Whether you're celebrating this day of romance or whether you're ready to pop the question, you can find jewelry as unique as she is with the modern convenience of online shopping at BlueNile.com. At BlueNile.com, you can find the perfect piece of jewelry for life special moments or even create the custom engagement ring of her dreams. Looking for fine jewelry but having trouble choosing? Blue Nile has jewelry experts on hand 24/7, available via phone or chat to help you find a memorable gift at every budget. Their simple online tools let you choose the diamond shape, size, and clarity, as well as the setting style. Blue Nile's bench jewelers will then handcraft that perfect piece to your specifications. Blue Nile's diamond price guarantee allows you to compare a competitor's diamond against one of their others. Blue Nile can even meet or beat their price. Right now, you can save up to 50% at BlueNile.com. That's BlueNile.com for up to 50% off. Again, BlueNile.com for 50% off. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined today by Mike DeFabo, Steelers writer for The Athletic. Mike, you are in Mobile, Alabama. First of all, is it hot down there? I didn't even look at the weather. You guys get to enjoy some time away from the cold?
It's a little bit warm down here. I'd say it's about 65 degrees, a little overcast skies. But compared to what we got in Pittsburgh, definitely warmer.
I hear that. Mike, I wanted to ask you, a lot of people this year are talking about the trenches, offensive line, defensive line, linebacker, getting bigger, stronger guys. But there's also talk about the corners in this draft and how deep of a cornerback draft this is. The Senior Bowl is always an interesting smattering of players because it's not, like the guys who are going top of the line, they're most likely not playing in that because They're like, listen, I know my value. I know I don't gotta be there to prove myself. I'm going in the first round. But there's a lot of guys in there who are going to make their hay, and guys we've seen over the past couple of years, rise up the boards because of their work, not just in the Senior Bowl game, but in the very practices that you're about to cover, because that's where I think a lot of the noise is made when people see these guys compete in practice. Christian Watson was a guy last year who was kind of looked at as like an interesting prospect because of his range and his measurements as a player, just his size and his athleticism. But then when people saw how crisp he ran his routes in the Senior Bowl practices, they were like, oh no, that's the guy. And he became a second-round pick for the Packers. Who are some of the guys that you're looking at that coming into this week that are going to be interesting players that the Steelers should keep their eyes on?
Yeah, so you touched upon it, and it's a very good point. The cornerback position is considered one of the deepest position groups in this draft. And it's very interesting that the Steelers have sent their defensive backs coach, Grady Brown, down here. He's going to be the defensive coordinator for the American team. And so he's going to firsthand have his eyes on a lot of these guys that the Steelers are going to be evaluating in this process. And I definitely imagine the Steelers are going to know all the top corners within the first couple rounds to figure out which one they might want to end up selecting. So a couple of the guys that are here who play corner, there's Tyreek Stevenson. He's a defensive back from Miami. And then the other big one is Caillou Blue Kelly from Stanford. Both of those guys, Dane Brugler, who does a great job for The Athletic rating the prospects, he considers those guys the second and third best corners on his board.
Whoa!
In terms of seniors,
okay, gotcha.
The top senior, Devon Witherspoon from Illinois, he opted out. But so those guys, though, they're guys who very easily could be in contention or consideration when the Steelers pick both at 17 and 32. Maybe even some of these guys could be hanging around when they draft in the middle of the second round. And we know that the cornerback position is important in the Steelers defense, and it's also a need because of some of the injuries and inconsistencies at that position. So I just like the way things are lining up for the Steelers, where they've got a guy who works exclusively with defensive backs. He's going to be here, and he's got an eye on a couple of these guys for sure.
I think those are interesting players that you mentioned there. Kelly there, the Stanford cornerback, 6'1", 190, a senior. Kind of measures well. You gotta be athletic if you're playing corner in the Pac-12 because they're throwing the ball a lot there. But Tyreek Stevenson, another guy, he's 6 foot 214, a little stocky there. The Steelers, I do think could use. I know people are going to be saying, but Mike and Chris, the Steelers can't draft cornerbacks. They're just going to be bad. But the Steelers, I think, with 3 picks in the top 50 this year, they're going to have multiple cracks at when they want to take that shot, if they want to take that shot. And the Senior Bowl guys, like you said, the top guys in this draft class that I think everyone will talk about, Christian Gonzalez of Oregon, Cam Smith of South Carolina, Joey Porter Jr. of Penn State. Of course, that's the one that everyone's going to talk about. And Devin Witherspoon, Kelly Ringo, all those guys. They're going to be first round material, and maybe one of them's their first pick with the 17th overall pick of the draft, maybe. But these guys like Tyreek Stevenson, like Kelly, Julius Brents is another guy that I think people are looking at as a 6'4" guy. There's going to be a lot of guys like that who are going to fall maybe to the second round or even the third round and be players that, if you can find them and they can become good role players for you or good solid corners that develop into starters for you sooner rather than later, they can very much be part of the turnaround that the Steelers need, because the cornerback room last year was all vets: Cam Sutton, Nikello Witherspoon, Levi Wallace, Arthur Mollett. I almost called him Arthur Moats. But you look at all those guys, they were vets across the board. Now I do think that especially they need to bring back Cam Sutton. We've talked about on this show a lot, is that I think that should be a priority this offseason. But now you have that vet culture in the cornerback room. Now get a young guy that you think is going to be that pillar guy in the future and let him learn from those vets so that he can start next to somebody solid and then eventually become your CB1 of the future.
Right, absolutely. And that's why I'm also intrigued by Grady Brown, the defensive backs coach, being here, because, obviously, like, it is true that the Steelers haven't done a good job of drafting and developing corners, with guys like Artie Burns and, Sean Davis was more of a safety, but he was right there as well. The secondary has been a challenge for the Steelers when it comes to drafting and developing. And so to have this guy, Grady Brown, who, he was only hired in February of 2021. He's new here. Omar Khan, even though he was in the organization, he's going to have a much larger say. Andy Weidel, the assistant GM, he was not here. He's going to have a larger say in some of these decisions. So it is interesting. It is a curious debate here. Like, is it relevant, the Steelers' past performance with defensive backs and corners, when you have these different people who are going to be part of the process? And that's why, just as much as I'll have an eye on these corners, I'm just as intrigued to talk to Grady Brown and figure out his process and how he can maybe flip the script there and how things could be different and how he hopes to be part of that process of finding the next future Steelers defensive back.
Right, because I think what a lot of people will look at this and they'll be like, I don't care about the Senior Bowl. Just show me the combine. Does he run a 4.4 flat? Then he's mine. People are going to do that. But these moments are really important. Cameron Sutton's a guy that he's not the fastest. He's not the tallest. He's actually a pretty standard build as far as a cornerback goes. But he's become an important player. Why? Because he's a great thinker and he studies the game so much. And you can only get that from talking to him. And as people who have talked to him, Cam Sutton can talk, and he knows his stuff, but he will also let you know that he knows his stuff because he can go over a lot of different things, not just football, but about life too. And the Steelers, I think they want more guys like that are leaders, that set a good tone and know how to carry themselves and can be part of a great locker room culture that they're trying to rebuild for the Pittsburgh Steelers right now. I think Cameron Sutton's he's the shining example of, hey, the Steelers have gotten a good cornerback pick. It's just that he hasn't had any others really around him over the past several years. And then I think it could be time to dip back into that. I do think it's going to be very important for Grady Brown to sift through some of these guys, get some initial talks in, see what happens. And then we'll start to see when pro days start to line up, where does Omar Khan go? Where does Mike Tomlin go? Who gets what visits throughout that time? Because then we might start to see, are the Steelers prioritizing corners or are they prioritizing other positions? I want to get Mike's thoughts on some of these other groups here, because offensive line, defensive line, linebacker, all of that should be in play for the Steelers, especially with their earlier picks. We'll talk about that in just a minute here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, so don't go anywhere. But first, before we do any of that, we got to talk to you guys about our great sponsors at FanDuel. And this year, the only app that you need for your Super Bowl party is FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. We're really excited about our new partners with FanDuel because they are the #1 sports book in America, and they're now our betting partner at Locked On. FanDuel is even better than people have thought it has been. They have so many great features that make betting on sports fun and easy. Right now, you can download FanDuel and bet Super Bowl 57 with a no-sweat first bet. What's that? You get up to $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. All that action on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from the money line to point spreads to who will score a touchdown. Best of all, you can get paid for your winnings instantly. Personally, there's nothing better than hitting a same-game parlay. So join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to claim your no-sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter here with Mike DeFabo of The Athletic, the Steelers beat writer who is in there in Mobile, Alabama for the Senior Bowl. I want to talk to you about some of the bigger guys because I'm sure, Mike, I could hear the groans over YouTube being like, oh, we don't need corners. We need guys who are 300 pounds and put their hands in the dirt. And not to make fun of those people, because I think they're right. The Steelers do need reinforcements on both sides of the ball in the trenches. And Andy Weidl, the guy that they brought over from the Eagles, who's now working alongside Omar Khan, has been known for helping to find those types of guys. Heck, you put out a great tweet after the Eagles whooped up on the Giants in the divisional round of the playoffs, and you were like, you guys want to draft a receiver when you see what the Eagles are doing with their offensive line. And heck, Landon Dickerson was a huge part of that, and them demolishing the Niners and their defensive front in the NFC Championship game. So I think that's absolutely part of the process here, Mike. And I think there's also a good crop of both sides of the ball there for the Steelers to pick from this year.
Yeah, what I like about Andy Weidl is he was successful on both trenches. And you know, not only were the Eagles, if you watch them, very effective running the football, protecting their quarterback from an offensive line perspective, their defensive line had 4 guys with double-digit sacks. And so they're doing it on both sides. And that was the point of the tweet, which I kind of was truthfully just sending out because I wanted to use the meme of Nick Sirianni, and I was trying to think
when he's doing this. Yeah, it's a cool meme though.
What would be something that would match that? And then it was more so to use the meme than to actually get my take out there. But I do feel like it's important for the Steelers to solidify their trenches on both sides of the football. So yeah, you mentioned the offensive lineman here at the draft, and I think the interesting thing when I look at the Steelers' offensive line training camp, everybody was looking at that to be the big issue for the Steelers, and they felt like the offensive line was going to hold the Steelers back. Well, they improved as the season went on, and I think they were probably the most improved position group of any. But the thing is, as much as they grew together, I could see almost any one of them being replaced under the right circumstances. And so I think if you're looking, as far as I'm concerned, I think that a left tackle would be the most valuable. I mean, it's the most valuable offensive line position because of the edge rushers you're going to face and the fact you're protecting the quarterback's blind side. I think if you look at the performance of the Steelers offensive line, Dan Moore Jr. might have been the weak link of the 5 or the one whose performance was most questionable. He also has the most positional flexibility where he could slide inside and I think challenge Kevin Dotson for the guard position. So I think that finding a tackle would be preferable if you're the Steelers, or if you could find somebody who could do both, who could play guard and tackle. So some of the guys that I like here, or I'll have my eyes on, kid from Syracuse, he's Matthew Bergeron. Actually, Dane Brugler mocked him to the Steelers with the 32nd pick. He thought if he was available there, he thought that could be a possibility for the Steelers. Everybody has talked about this. Ohio State, what's his name?
Dawand Jones.
Dawand Jones. Yes. He's got an 89-inch wingspan.
He's 6'8", 360. That's his listing.
And so I just want to kind of shake his hand to see how massive this guy is. But he also, I think, would be I mean, you got to get those big bodied guys, and I think he would be an intriguing guy. And then one of the guys is considered one of the best, possibly the best athlete here, Osiris Torrance from Florida. Yes. He's a guard. And I mean, you look back at the Steelers' history when they drafted Marquise Pouncey and David DeCastro, that anchored their offensive line for like a decade. Yep. So even though a guard sometimes it's not it's not going to be a sexy draft pick, that's going to be an important position, obviously, that can pay dividends for years to come. So those are just a couple of the linemen that I like here.
No, I feel you on that. And those are absolutely some of the names out there. Dawand Jones, like you said, his ridiculous wingspan and his size, the Steelers do want to be able to win matchups. And Dawand Jones is a guy who I think, everyone's going to look at Paris Johnson because he was the big name, for Ohio State's of the offensive tackles that's out there. But you love his size and length. You love his functional strength. I think that he showed just the little bit I've been able to study. I've not been able to go film guru for draft prospects yet. I've just been too busy with Pitt stuff and Steelers stuff and everything to kind of turn to that just yet. But from what I saw, like, this guy seems very athletic. He seems to be able to get into certain spots. Like, for a guy who's 6'8" and that big, he is very impressive with how he handles himself. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how he fits into it. But O'Cyrus Torrence, he's one of those guys. He can be that road grader that's in the middle part of your line. And it's an interesting question, though, because, he's a guy who, if you put in at the guard, you're assuming James Daniels is staying in. You're assuming Mason Cole, what they brought to the table was good enough. You would think that would be the Kevin Dotson, place that he would go in there and fight for. And you'd probably expect to win as a guy who might be, the 32nd overall pick or the second round pick. I doubt that he's a first round pick. Right. He's just by my eyes. But there's those guys. I also think there's the Tennessee guy, Darnell Wright. He's another guy that people have looked at as a potential second round guy, 6'6", 335. And, we all know the Steelers, they love to go get guys from Big Ten and SEC and try to get those type of guys, that are going to fill on their line and be physical guys of the future. The Steelers need guys like that to dominate in the trenches, especially if the offense wants to be the kind of offense that we saw in the NFC Championship game. I mean, the Niners came into that game with one of the most feared run defenses in the NFL, and the Eagles just plowed right over them. Granted, it took time to do that, and part of that was, their quarterback situation was messed up, and the Eagles really had no fear of the Niners ever taking a big lead or anything. But still, it was their ability to Landon Dickerson, Jason Kelsey, the way that they were able to go after those guys, Lane Johnson, all of them. They were dominant against a really dominant defensive front that gave a lot of people fits. The Steelers' offensive line got to a place where they were decent at the end of the year, and they were able to win matchups against not great teams. But if you want to be able to team that can run the ball with Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren and go play action and let Kenny Pickett kind of read off of that, you need to be able to dominate even against the very good teams. I think that's a very big reason why they should be looking to this group right now.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And for me, I think you have to look at where did the biggest growth in the Steelers offense happen in the second part of the year. And it was running the football. The second half of the year, they were a top 10 rushing offense. And that was, to me, the biggest catalyst for the success they had, was that they were able to finally have some success there. So I think that was maybe, I don't know what to say in spite of, but it wasn't like he was running behind Marquise Pouncey and David DeCastro. And so I think getting some linemen that can help continue that emphasis on running the football, I think, is important. And then also keeping Kenny Pickett upright. I mean, he got out of a lot of sacks because of his mobility and kept plays alive, but he also got concussed twice during this season. And so, keeping him upright, I think, is in having a solid, dependable run game to support him, I think, is more important than giving him a third toy to play with in another wide receiver.
No, I agree with that. But we also want to talk defensive line. Are there any defensive line guys that you're looking at that you're really excited to see just how big and strong they are? Because I think that's another area where the Steelers, they got DeMarvin Leal, who I think is going to be a really interesting fit and a guy that you can kind of flex out and help on the edge. But I think that they need a true beat-em-up Cam Hayward, Stephon Tuitt, line up in the middle and crush people type of defensive lineman. Who are some of the guys that could fit that profile that are at the Senior Bowl?
Yeah, to be honest, I need to look a little bit more when it comes to these defensive linemen, but I agree with you because I like DeMarvin Leal, and I think that he's a versatile guy, that he could play both inside and outside in different personnel groupings and packages. But then Larry Ogunjobi was a very significant player for the Steelers, but he was also extremely injured. And I really wonder what they're going to do with him. And with Cam Hayward, he was still near a Pro Bowl level when he was at his best, but he's also getting up there in age. And, you start to wonder with a guy who reaches that point, when is his game going to start to fall apart? Just because of the physical nature of it. So I think absolutely defensive line should be a position group that the Steelers should be considering for one of their first couple picks for sure.
Just me glancing down the list here, because I'm just like you. I'm still getting used to who all's there. The only person I know that's definitely there is Servassier Dennis, the pit man that I've covered. I think he'd be a very nifty pick if the Steelers could get him on day 3, because it depends on his athleticism. But Servassier Dennis is a very smart linebacker. That guy can play multiple positions. He's a commander on the field. He's a guy that's I think he's going to be a coach someday with how smart he is. But we got to see how he measures up. But defensive line wise, there's a guy, Keanu Benton, out of Wisconsin, 6'4", 315, the kind of guy that I think that he is going to be interesting to watch. I think that they need bigger guys who can be dominant. He's more of a nose tackle than just a defensive lineman who can kind of flex out and move around the way Cam Hayward or Larry Ogunjobi did. But I think they need those type of guys, even if they're not starters that are defining starters next year, because Keanu Benton's not a first round guy. He's more of a maybe if he works his way up, he can be that second round pick, or he can be a third round pick. But that's also what you're looking at here in the Senior Bowl. You're not necessarily looking for the guy that you're taking at 17th overall or even 32nd overall. You're looking at that 49th overall pick. You're looking at that 80th overall pick in the third round. This is where you can find some of those diamonds in the rough and guys that develop into star players for your future. I mean, Alex Highsmith, a third round pick from the last year. This guy finished with double-digit sacks, and now everyone's really excited to see what he'll do with a healthy TJ Watt next season for an entire year. I think finding that guy who can learn alongside Cam Hayward in his final years in the NFL and maybe be the guy that can take the torch and sort of carry it forward as far as, being physical defensive linemen that set the tone at the line of scrimmage for a Steelers defense. I think that this is a great opportunity to find some guys that could fit into that role here in this class.
And the Steelers impressed me with DeMarvin Leal. I mean, when you look at him just being a third-round pick, I didn't have the highest expectations for him. But when he came in, I thought he was quite impactful. And so I think that again speaks to Andy Weidel. I don't know how much he, specifically had to do with that draft pick, but it would suggest that it's another example of those guys being able to find in the mid rounds a guy that can be a difference maker or a solid contributor for you.
Absolutely. Mike, thank you so much for joining us. We hope that you have a great time in Mobile. Let people know how they can find you, follow you, and also catch all the stuff that you're going to be reporting from Mobile while you're at the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, absolutely. I keep it simple on Twitter. You can just find me at Mike DeFabo, and always catch my work in the Athletic. We always have some kind of promotion going on, some kind of a deal or discount. So maybe you got some extra Christmas money left over from grandma, something like that, but it'd be a good time to spend some. Get yourself a subscription, and I'm sure it'll be well worth it around draft time.
Absolutely. Do check that out. Mike does a great job, as does his partner, Mark Caboli, over there. They're very good people. We've had Mark on the show as well. We'll try to have him on again very soon. Mike, thanks so much for joining me. I'm their host, Chris Carter, here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. As always, you can find this show anywhere podcasts are hosted, but especially on YouTube. Like this video if you saw it on YouTube. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of our daily episodes. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. You can also find my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, where I cover Pitt athletics and all things Pitt sports there. We'll be talking about that moving forward. But tomorrow we got more Senior Bowl talk. We'll finally get a look at some practice and see how things have been shaping out. We'll talk about all of that here right on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Be there for the Wednesday episode. We'll see you when we do it.